Ologies.
Life.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Green Thread here. I'm Allie.
And I'm Alexis.
And we have a really fun special guest today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Brandy Rogers, and I teach biology at Georgia Highlands College.
Yay.
Nice to have you. Yeah, claps.
Those are my credentials.
So my fun fact for this, did you know that the total weight of all ants on Earth is estimated to be roughly equal to the total weight of humans on Earth?
I have heard some statistics along those lines before, so that's not a total surprise.
No, you're supposed to act surprised.
It is fascinating, and I actually talk about that concept a lot in my classes, where we talk about biomass and how many of an organism there are adds into that total biomass. And so if you think about things that are sort of lower on the food chain, like producers like grass or trees or things like that, they're everywhere. But things that require a lot of energy as you move your way up are going to be bigger, maybe, but there are going to be fewer, like apex predators, that sort of thing. So I kind of think about it in the same way, where there's so many ants if you put them all together. Although that's pretty impressive because we are also a lot of human beings.
Yeah.
So
I know, because like I've heard that like ants can carry like a lot more tons more than their weight too.
Yeah.
So it's like that's a weird metric to think about
yes.
all of them being roughly equal to us, but then also they can carry more than what we would consider tons and tons of weight.
Sure.
So it's just weird.
So if we ever go to war with the ants, we're really in trouble.
Yeah, we're
because
done.
they could pick us up
We're
and carry us
done.
away.
Ants versus humans, you
Yeah.
decide. So kind of what we've talked about in previous episodes of like, you know, kind of where we start with the circle of life and how that plays into the part of science. Is there a integral part of your career, your life, that you decided that this was the career that you wanted to go in?
Oh, that's a good question. So I started out, I've always been fascinated with biology ever since I was a little kid. So my mom used to subscribe to Reader's Digest, which everyone in the 1980s had a subscription, I believe, to the Reader's Digest. And I can remember being 8 or 9 years old and reading the medical dramas. Those fascinated me. So I was always like, oh, how does my body work? Like, this is really cool. And so I was always kind of interested in that side of things, kind of looking inward biology, if you will. And then when I decided to go back to college, a non-traditional student. I had been a medical assistant for about 10 years, and wanted to go back to school to advance my degree. And I thought I wanted to stay in the medical field. But then I got to school and I started taking my biology prerequisites to get into the nursing program, and I realized it was really more the science than the patient care. I had done patient care, and it's not that I don't like people, because I love people, y'all know that. But I was kind of done with that aspect of it, and the science side of it, the biology side of it, like how it all works and how it all fits together, was so fascinating to me, because I was learning about things outside of human biology, because that was largely my focus before it, with the medical interest. And so when I went back to school as a non-traditional student, switched my major from nursing and just went for a traditional biology degree. And then I started going outside. Sounds like a weird thing to say. You know, I mean, I grew up outside playing in the cul-de-sac and going to the beach and whatever, like a normal childhood. But I didn't ever pay attention to the.
You started
I wa-
noticing
Correct,
things outside.
absolutely. I was playing and I was having a wonderful time and I was picking up caterpillars and stuff, but I wasn't looking at those caterpillars, you know.
Right.
So it was much more in my adult life, sort of in my second iteration of myself, if you will, that I sort of switched gears and started looking at outward biology as opposed to inward biology. So I don't think there was any one particular moment, as much of it was as it was just a progression, learning that things that I didn't know. And like they say, the more you learn, the more you know that you don't know, and there's more to know. And so it just kind of started that way. But yeah, for me, it was sort of opportunities that I wasn't even aware of that were there, that sort of came across my path through going back to school. So that's how we ended up here.
Yeah, that is so awesome. I wanted to ask a little bit more in depth about that. What kind of schooling and research have you done throughout your life? I know you have your master's or
I
PhD.
do. Yep, I have a master's degree in integrative biology.
Okay.
Which is kind of a fancy buzzword for just saying that you have to go cross-disciplinary to answer questions in science anymore, and that's really true, regardless of your discipline. So if you want to go all the way back to, you know, I went to technical school for the medical assisting stuff and all that, but in terms of sort of traditional education, I did an associate's degree in biology at Georgia Highlands, which
Mhm.
is where
Go
we've all
Chargers.
found
Yeah.
ourselves at. Yes, go Chargers. I finished my biology bachelor's degree at Dalton State, and then I did the master's degree at Kennesaw State. So stayed fairly local in the region. Um, and in my undergraduate classes, and I had some opportunities to do some research. So I worked on a conservation project for endangered turtles
Aw.
at Dalton State, and they were actually just getting started with their in situ or ex situ conservation program where they've got they're raising and breeding turtles in captivity, and so I had
Mhm.
to help. I helped get that set up and write some care manuals for some of the turtles and stuff. So that's kind of where it started with like, oh, animals and
Yeah.
research and that sort of thing. And so I was looking to go to graduate school, and I thought I would stick with animal biology. I'm
Mhm.
really fascinated with evolution and genetics and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I actually ended up in a plant lab, which was not where I would have expected to be,
Yeah.
because I just had never studied plants before.
Mhm.
But the pitch was, so my PI that I worked with, the pitch was, well, these are plants, but they act like animals. So I worked on Cuscuta, which is a parasitic plant that actually uses volatile chemical signals to find its host plant. So it's a holoparasite. It doesn't photosynthesize. It has to attach to a host, or it will die. And I was hooked. I
Mhm.
was like, okay, you got me with
Yeah.
that one. So vampire plants, sign me up.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's the kind of work that I did, and in graduate school, doing population genetics and ecology of this particular species of Cuscuta, which is an endangered species, and it's found only in very specific habitat types in Georgia and Alabama. So that was my research work in undergrad, or I'm sorry, in grad school. And then since I've been faculty, I've had an opportunity to work on all different types of research projects with
Oh, yeah.
students,
Mhm.
which is
Yeah.
really fun
Yeah.
because then they can bring me interests,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then I can borrow those interests.
Yeah.
So, like with Allie, when we worked together, we did
Uh-huh.
a capstone research project together on salamanders, and I think salamanders are fun to catch anyway. So
Oh,
we
yeah.
had a great time doing that for science. So, yeah, so I kind of dabble in all kinds of things now. So, but that's a little bit about my background in research.
That's awesome. To kind of like, I guess, pull on your academics a little bit more than just like your background, bring out your teacher for a second.
Okay.
How would how
Teacher
would
mode on.
Let's do this.
yeah, how would you kind of define biology for someone who's not, I mean, they might know what the like, baseline textbook definition is, but like if you were to go and talk to a group of people, which I think you have like non-STEM students
Sure.
before, how
Sure.
would you kind of describe it?
Well, I always break the word down. Etymology is one of my favorite things. So I always look at what the word, what do the roots mean, and how do you put that together. So ology is obviously study of, right? That's
Mhm.
what we're doing. So
Yeah.
and bio is life. So that's the main thing. And it is such a huge field that there's no
Yeah.
way to really define it other
Mhm.
than if it's living and you're studying it, that is biology. Um, it is the minute and also the extremely infinitesimally huge,
Mhm.
right? It is inside and outside, right? It's everything. It's what came before us and what will be after, the
Mhm.
Mhm.
processes that shape those things. I mean, it's really it's medicine if you want to go completely into sort of a human or even veterinary standpoint. So
Mhm.
there are so many things to investigate and so many questions to ask because anything that's alive is innately weird. And that is the
True.
best part. That's what I always tell my students. It's like, you see, you've chosen the right field because biology is the weirdest one.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating. Life does very strange things, and figuring out how that works, that's biology. So it encompasses everything from molecular science to ecology, which we'll talk about some. Paleontology is in biology, of course, medical science, like we were saying. I know I'm blanking on like a million other
Yeah.
examples of things that would be considered biology, but anything that's alive. Does
Yeah,
that
what
work?
what isn't biology,
Yeah,
you
really.
know?
True.
You can even tie in non-living things because they affect living things. And so
Mhm.
you're right. Everything is biology. That's
Everything. What's
that's
biology? Everything. You
everything.
know.
Biology is everything and everything is biology.
Mic drop, walk away.
Yes,
That's all you need
yes,
to know.
absolutely.
So with that being said, like how would you differentiate it from ecology?
I would say that ecology is probably a subdiscipline within biology, and if somebody were not to classify it that way, they would definitely call it biology adjacent. Ecology is the study of where we live, so it's actually a kind of back to the etymology thing. It comes from the Greek word, which is I think pronounced oikos, but it's spelled like oikos, like the yogurt,
Mhm.
Oh.
Oikos, and the Greek word means home, and sometimes it means household. So what it translates to really
Oh.
is our home and all the inhabitants. And that is, so it's like eco comes from oikos or
Yeah.
akos. And so ecology is the study of home, which I've always
Oh,
found to
that
be really
literally could make me cry.
it really is. It's very profound. And so, it's the technical definition, you're looking at interactions, connectivity, how living things interact with each other, how they interact with their environments, how the non living aspects of the environments influence the patterns and the processes that you see.
Mhm.
And so it's really about if I had to put it in one word, if I were challenged to do that, I would probably say connection.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
powerful.
It's a web, right? The whole
Yeah.
world is a web and everything is connected from the soil under your feet to the microbes in that soil to the air that you breathe to the birds that are flying overhead. And that's the beauty of it. That's where the ecology part comes in. So you could do biology in any other field, but when you're looking any other biological field, I should say, but when you're
Yeah.
looking specifically at ecology, it's all about interactions. And again, you have to think about it at scale. So you can do ecology at the microbial scale. You can look at interactions between bacterial cells and archaea and see how they're doing things and what sort of compounds they're producing and that sort of thing. But you can also look at it at the ecosystem level or even the biosphere. So when you're looking at things like global climate issues
Mhm.
or changing weather patterns, those types of things, and you're talking about how that's affecting living populations, that's ecology too. So it can be
Yeah.
dialed in down to the teeny tiny or all the way out to the whole planet, which is again kind of like biology. So it encompasses a lot, but that's so I wouldn't say that it's different from biology, but just
Just
part of it, a
yeah.
subdiscipline. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Going off of that, kind of going a little bit deeper into the ecology whole, how would you say that plants versus animals, I know it's all connected, but how differently do they kind of interact in nature, like, or with each other?
So, um, I'm gonna take that is as like asking how different do plants interact with other plants as opposed to animals with other animals. That's
Okay.
kind of how I interpret that
Yeah,
question. Is that fair?
that's fair.
Okay. So, I think it's probably because I worked on the vampire parasite plant,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? But I think that we don't give plants enough credit for the ways that
Yes.
they do interact with one another.
Hmm.
And there's lots of work that's being done that's showing us these connections. So the forest is connected to each other through interactions with fungi in the soil.
Yes, and
We
we've
went over
done an
that.
episode about that.
Okay, good, good. So you've got your mycorrhizal
Yes.
interactions
Yes.
on lock. Okay, perfect. So that's all connected, Um, something that's also fascinating that I always like to talk about, especially with non-majors, because if you can grab their attention, then it's like, I got something cool to tell
Mhm.
you, right? So certain types of plants, well, they'll produce compounds, volatile chemicals that they can release into the air to signal things,
Mhm.
right? So if have you ever grown tomatoes or picked a fresh tomato?
Mhm.
You know
Yeah.
that smell? You immediately recognize it as like, that's tomato. Well,
Mhm.
those are just volatile chemicals that tomato
Huh.
is releasing. So what the plant is actually intending to do there is to increase the amount of chemicals that it is producing to protect itself from herbivory. So when you go and break a
Mm.
stem, it's thinking you're something that's trying to munch on it, which you are ultimately, but it's going to start cranking up production of those chemicals to try to fend you off. Well, the weird part is other neighboring plants can pick up on those volatiles that the chewed on plant is emitting, and then they will in turn increase their own production of protective volatile compounds. So it's like I'm telling you, save yourself. And you're turning up your defenses because I told you to. So that's really outside of what we think about in terms of what plants can do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I think we give a lot of study and a lot of attention to animal behavior and animal communication, but plants are doing it too, and fungi and everything. So
Yeah.
I like to think a lot about. I know you guys have probably seen recent stories where people are like they've got uh, some sort of headphones and they're listening to trees or they're listening to the wind. And it's
Yes.
like the music of nature and
Oh,
all this
I
stuff.
Yes.
love those.
So I just think that there's a lot that we don't understand about the
Yeah.
way that nature communicates with nature, with itself, right?
Mhm.
And I think that we tend to be very cocky as humans, right? Where we
Yes.
think like, well, we have this amazing gift of speech and communication
Mhm.
and storytelling, and I think that we probably miss a lot of what's going on
Mhm.
with other organisms. And so I wish that I had a really cool like. Well, I know that they're talking. The fireflies are talking to each other about these things, but you've probably also seen videos on YouTube or presentations and things where animals are behaving in ways that you would never expect them. Tool use and emotional responses and things
Mhm.
like that. And so I think we just don't really truly understand.
Yeah.
But everything's interacting and affecting each other in ways that we don't.
We don't really
Yeah,
know.
we haven't
We've hardly
completely, at
scratched
least,
the surface of
absolutely.
all of that.
So much more to discover. That's what I always
Mhm.
tell students.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say, well, when you decide to go get your PhD, that's what you can study
Yeah,
because
there
there
you
are
go.
plenty of questions out there that we still have to investigate.
And that's the beauty of science is
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
just a big
It's
question.
Yes.
never ending.
It's all about the questions. It's a
Mhm.
search for knowledge, right?
Yep.
Pursuit of knowledge. And that's why science is fun. Biology is the best one because it's the weirdest. But no, science in general. Yeah, just finding out what we don't know. It's the best thing to do, right?
So agree. I so agree. And kind of going off of all of this, like obviously with everything being connected, they have intuitively an impact on the health of everything around them as well.
Mhm.
Would you how differently or how does the health of an ecosystem differentiate from like how they all work together as a system, if that makes sense?
So just to sort of clarify, like if you can you give me maybe an example of what you're thinking of? Like,
Like I know when you're talking about trees and like the
mhm.
mycorrhizal network and like I know I've heard and we've kind of talked about how like if one tree needs more water or needs something like they can share resources,
Mhm.
how would that like impact the overall health of that ecosystem, like their ability to kind of connect through those weird ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's integral to the system, and that's sort of what we try to learn and what we try to teach about ecosystems, and particularly when we start talking about conservation and protecting resources. You know, it's all about each piece. Each piece is a part of of the larger whole, and sometimes you can see the effects when you remove one piece from an ecosystem. So wolves in Yellowstone is a great
Yeah.
example, right? We
Yeah.
keep coming back to that story again and again because it's such a successful story
Oh
of
yeah.
an apex predator that has been extirpated and then being reintroduced in all the changes that happen that trickle down. So that's sort of a classic story that you can use to sort of refer to. But it works that way in every ecosystem. You pull out one tiny piece and then things are going to change. So one of the activities that I like to do in one of my intro bio classes is to take a ball of twine and everyone in the class gets an organism. So maybe it's a marine ecosystem. So we've some people have got fish, and some people have got coral, and some people whatever. So we pass the string. Say you have I don't know seagrass, and I have
Yeah.
turtle. I'm a sea turtle. So I can take the string from you because now I can eat you, right? So we play the game and we make a whole network around the room, and then we start to play with what happens if whoever's holding seagrass pull on your string, right? And then we
Mhm.
talk about how who all can feel the pull,
Mhm.
right?
Oh.
I'll say, okay, if you have sharks, drop your string, and you see the slack, right? So it's a really good visual representation of how the rest of the ecosystem is still intact,
Mhm.
but there's an effect that happens. And
Yeah.
so sometimes you have other organisms that can move in and fill those niches that are left empty by a species that's been, drastically reduced in population or gone extinct or something like that. And sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
And so it really just depends sort of where you are and what the function of that organism is. But everything has a place
Mhm.
in the greater connectedness. And so again, it's sort of hubris of us to say, well, that's just a spider. It doesn't matter. Or, that's just
Yeah.
that particular type of
Mhm.
bacteria. Well, we really don't understand the complex types of interactions. And that's also what ecologists research. So that's really fun. That's a really fun reason to be an ecologist because you get to look at those interactions and try to figure out those webs. So
I hope to.
I don't know if I answered the question. Did I? I
Yeah,
feel like
Yeah.
I went on a
no.
rabbit trail a little bit.
No, that's totally
Okay.
how it works.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Which actually going off of like your visual example, say one of those people in the room were holding it, were a human.
Mhm.
How does the health of everything else in that web affect human beings or vice versa?
Oh, those are two excellent questions. So, if we snapped our fingers and all of the humans on the planet disappeared, I think everything else would be fine.
I think so too.
I think that this planet would breathe a collective sigh of relief,
Yes,
to be
it would.
honest. Now, I'm not advocating for
For human extinction.
voluntary human extinction. Although there are some organizations out there that do talk about, we can contribute to the health of the planet by voluntarily ceasing to reproduce.
Yeah,
So
I
making
heard that.
decisions in terms of like actually making fewer people. So to answer it that way, the world will be fine without us.
Mhm.
I also like to think about things like when you don't pull the vines off your house, they're right back, right? So it would
Yeah.
not take long for me to be absent and that house would belong to the earth again,
Mhm.
right? So I think that's the answer in that direction. On the other side of it, there are so many services that as humans receive that we benefit from
Mhm.
Mhm.
that are ecological in nature that we do not recognize. And that's the flip side of it, right? The planet
Yeah.
doesn't really need us. We
need
really
it.
need the
We
planet.
need the planet
But
really
we
badly.
tend to sort of think about it in the opposite way,
Mhm.
right? Which is dangerous and
I
kind of
know.
terrifying. But yeah. So does that? Yeah.
Yeah, because I was
That's
say that's what we
both.
say every
Yes,
like episode.
and
We're always
both.
like, we are important to the planet, or the planet's important to us. But you heard it here, folks. It's both
We
ways.
are
Yeah.
only important. I don't want to say that because we are. Everyone,
Yeah.
when you look back over the record of life and
Yeah.
you think about who was there, who were the players, and what were they doing, they were all important in some way. And obviously, humans are incredibly impactful,
Mhm.
whether good or bad, right? You can't
Mhm.
deny the impact. And so I don't want to say that we're not that important. We overestimate our importance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we overestimate what the planet owes us,
Mhm.
I think. And so I think that feeds into the sort of taking mentality,
Mhm.
right? And we are also a fascinating creature. Homo sapiens as a species
Mhm.
is fascinating. In one particular example is our ability to increase our own carrying capacity,
Mhm.
right? So for those of you who are not ecology students or
Mhm.
professors, carrying capacity is the number of organisms that can be reasonably supported by a particular ecosystem or particular habitat, right?
Mhm.
There are ways that you can increase that, right? You can come up with more food. You can come up with more space. You can maybe find more water. So these are all
Mhm.
things because you're limited. The carrying capacity is really set by resources.
Yeah.
So as populations grow, the resources become more scarce, and then you have population growth that sort of levels out, right, at that
Yeah.
carrying capacity, because you run out of resources and you're limited.
Mhm.
Well, humans have been able to increase that exponentially, and we don't really know where the top is. So if you go back and look at a human population graph from like all time,
Mhm.
right? Recorded history and even earlier than that. If you talk about we start where Homo sapiens come in 250,000 years ago,
Mhm.
you can actually see a flat line for almost all of history until about
Mhm.
1850, 1900, and it starts to curve up like this, right?
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
when you look at a graph of a normal population, a non-human population, and you see that carrying capacity, you're going to see fluctuations above and below that imaginary line,
Mhm.
right? So here's your maximum capacity, and sometimes you're going to have more individuals,
Mhm.
but that's going to come back down pretty quickly because there's not going to be enough resources, and then there's going to be more resources, so it's going to come back up. It's never going to be a perfect straight line. But
Mhm.
I've never seen another species that goes in a perfect straight line and then jumps up like this,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? And so we've been able to do that by releasing ourselves from pressures,
Mhm.
ecological pressures. We have increased our ability to eat
Mhm.
by agriculture. We have increased
Mhm.
our longevity through medical technology,
Mhm.
right? We have power through fossil fuel use, right? We have all of these innovations, all these technological innovations. And
Mhm.
so we have overpopulated, right? But we
Yeah.
don't think of, we
Yeah.
think these are all amazing accomplishments,
Oh yeah.
and we shouldn't sell that short. So that's why I say, oh, I don't want to say we're not important because we've done some pretty
Mhm.
amazing things.
Mhm.
But then it leads to that attitude of like, well, we can fix it, or we can, I'm not going to worry about that today because we are good at technology and we'll
Yeah.
fix these
Yeah.
problems. Um, but yeah, that's a dangerous way to look at it too. So
Yeah. Well, I always think, we were powerful enough to create these problems that we're powerful enough to find solutions as
right,
well. Like
right,
we have the resources, we have the technology, we have the tools to destroy, but also to help.
yeah. I don't know, you guys may be a little young to remember Aquanet hairspray and chlorofluorocarbons and the ozone layer.
I know
You know what
about
I'm
it, but
talking about?
I don't
Okay.
think I was alive for
So
it.
yeah. So Aquanet hairspray was not the number one problem, but
Yeah.
I remember that because I was a kid in the 80s when hairspray was a really big deal,
Mhm.
aerosol hairspray. So aerosols contained chlorofluorocarbons, which are these chemicals that were actually destroying ozone.
Mhm.
And without the ozone, we get, the
Right.
ozone layer protects us from solar radiation. And so it's very dangerous if you start to get holes in your ozone layer. That problem was brought to the forefront, brought to the world, right? And we
Mhm.
said, okay, we're eating holes in the ozone layer. And everyone was like, okay, let's stop using chlorofluorocarbons. And now, you do ever hear about the ozone layer? You don't. Now you
No.
No.
hear about climate change. It's not the same. It's not the same
Yeah.
problem. We fixed it. We fixed the problem. Now, I'm being a little bit glib because nothing is that easy, but that was a major issue and
Right.
humanity recognized it and they fixed it.
Mhm.
So we do have the
We
ability.
have the
We
power to
have
do
the
it. We
ability.
have done it
We are
before.
smart.
Mhm.
We are motivated. We are problem solvers. We're
Mhm.
communicators. We're team workers. We can do it, but you got to figure it out.
And
Right.
you've got to work together too, because
Yes.
that's another thing. Like a
Yes.
lot of times
Yes.
people are just like conflicted because of, other people's ideas of what may be the right or wrong answer, or
Yes.
like, there's just not an overall consensus of one thing. And so it becomes divisive, and
Yes.
then we just can't focus. And I'm like,
Yeah.
focus,
Then
focus,
it's more about
focus.
arguing than about actually
Yes.
fixing any problems. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. So talking about biology and the different disciplines of it, which I guess this is more of just like a what are your thoughts versus me asking this question, but where does evolution come in? Is that discussed more in biology, which I know this past semester we talked about comparative vertebrate anatomy and the
Yeah.
history of that, and like I'm not going to go on that tangent even though like I really want to cuz
I
I
would love
really
to
love
do
that
another
class.
episode and talk about comparative vertebrate anatomy
Yes,
and physiology.
I would be all about that. But where does evolution kind of fit in that picture?
Evolution is everywhere. So if everything is biology, then biology is everything. Then everything is evolution, and evolution is everything. It's the same. So there's a famous quote from Theodosius Dozansky, who's a geneticist, and he said, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution."
Mm,
And that what that basically tells us, what he meant by that is that any question that you can address has some tie into evolution
mhm,
in biology, because evolution is the process, but
mhm,
also the way we understand our connectedness to each other and every other living thing on the planet.
mhm,
We all came from a common ancestor. We know that because of DNA,
mhm,
Right.
right? And so the origin story
mhm,
comes from the ability of species to diversify through natural selection and evolution,
mhm,
but it also explains the diversity that we see now.
mhm,
Right. So it's not just you can look back and you can look forward. Every natural population is undergoing evolution at all times. Every population is dynamic, it's always changing. And that's because it's driven by environmental changes. And the
mhm,
Yeah.
environment is dynamic, and living organisms in that environment are dynamic. And so things change.
mhm,
And sometimes it's very gradual, like we see in the case of evolutionary change in most cases.
mhm,
Um, but everything that is living evolves,
mhm.
and so you cannot separate the two.
Right.
So I don't even think you could call it a subdiscipline like you
Yeah.
can with ecology. You can't study biology and not study evolution in some
Mhm.
Yeah.
capacity.
Because you're only getting, if you just were to study something biologically right now, I mean, that's almost impossible. You need to know where it came from. Why does it do this? Why does it
Sure.
look like that? Or like, you're not asking enough questions if you don't end up there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I absolutely agree. It's a package deal.
Yeah.
That's really crazy. I just like thinking, it just blew my mind, I guess, right in this very moment. I'm like, wow, that really is both, there's not one encompassing the other. They're both kind of like a parallel,
Yeah.
time
I mean,
frame.
you have to accept one to understand the
Yeah.
other, I think is part of it. But it's
Wow.
also a really powerful tool when you work in or learn in evolutionary theory to sort of put those pieces together. So if you're interested in, like Alexis was saying, where do things fit, and
Yeah.
why do these things have these traits that they have? It's a really powerful set of tools that you can use to investigate. Putting together phylogenies and figuring out the best hypothesis to explain relationships between organisms. And it's not just about figuring out who's related to who because it's interesting, although it is,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
it informs so many things. Understanding of disease, understanding of heredity. It helps us to discover new compounds that we can use for medications because we look
Right.
at organisms that manufacture similar compounds and
Mhm.
metabolically and things like that. So, yeah. I really like evolutionary theory, as you can
Yeah.
probably tell. I just wanted to talk about that a little bit more,
Yeah.
about how
Yeah.
cool it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and like, to go off of that, like how evolutionary, because I kind of feel like we've very subtly said that evolutionary biology is a big part of conservation, just because you're learning about it to like conserve other things and like
Sure.
learn about future things. So, kind of taking conservation out of the evolutionary part, how would you say conservation plays a part in the biological world? Like, how do those two coincide?
That is also a very good question. Lots of answers to
Mhm.
that one as
Yeah.
well. Um, so conservation biology is very similar to any kind of biology or ecology, any of the things that we've
Yeah.
been talking about in terms of scale. And so, biologically speaking, if you're working in conservation, you might be working to preserve an entire ecosystem because you are aware of the value of that ecosystem or the services that it provides, or there are rare and endangered animals or plants there or whatever. But you might be looking at genetic conservation,
Mhm.
right? So you can
Yeah.
look at things like chemical diversity. So if this organism, back to the sort of looking for new compounds for medications, that's a good example. If this organism has the genes to produce this protein, then what else can it do, or
Right.
what can its relatives do? You know, um, so it's all about really all about the scale, right?
Oh,
Does
yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah,
Mhm.
it does. 100%.
Mhm.
100%.
Yeah, definitely. And how would you say, speaking of like today's and just modern challenges, what are the human impacts? Like, what is the concern there? I know obviously we see climate change being talked about all the
Mhm.
time. We talk about it a lot on our own episodes all the time, just about human impacts. So what's going on there? What are your thoughts on human impacts and how that is affecting biology today, how we study biology, ecology, anything related to biology?
Gosh, that's a I kind of touched on some of that already,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, let me think. Let me think about how I want to
Okay.
sort of
Yeah.
address this one. Um, I've only been alive for 45 years,
Mhm.
right? So placing it into the context of my lifetime is different than looking at it over the long term, which is kind of
Mhm.
how you pull in evolution with conservation
Mhm.
and then the human impacts thing. So I only know what the earth looked like when I was 45 years ago,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
my only way to sort of gauge things.
Mhm.
And so I value evolutionary biology and paleontology to sort of see like what were things like way back then. And of course, you're not going to expect to see the same ecosystems in the same place because
Right.
things change and uplift and tectonic plates. And I heard you just talk to a geologist.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Um, so that, but the way that ecosystems used to be before and that living organisms used to be here before can sort of inform conservation going forward,
Mhm.
right? It could kind of inform how we know how much our impact is. I think measuring our impact is sort of what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
So there's this interesting space in between my 45 years and paleo,
Mhm.
right? Which is sort of like that archaeology time frame,
Mhm.
right? And so you can even look back into just the near future, even if you're looking at prehistory, you can look at things like trash middens or things like that from
Mhm.
other societies, and you can make conjectures about maybe what a population looked like. So if there's tons and tons of shells from a particular type of oyster,
Mhm.
for example, that
Yeah.
some culture is eating, and now you go back and you look and there aren't those types of oysters there, or maybe there's a few, but you don't
Mhm.
see them in that type of abundance. So I think in measuring impact, it's important to look at now
Mhm.
and 2,000 years ago and 2 million years ago and 2 billion years ago. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? To
Mhm.
get a total picture. I think the things that I see in my own daily life in terms of impacts, I feel like we have the data.
Oh yeah.
We know that we are impacting the earth in a negative way
Mhm.
for the most part, but it doesn't stop us.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's where I don't the answer to that is I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
understand really why that is, because you can talk to people and they seem to understand.
Mhm.
Save the whales,
Mhm.
save the bees, do the things, right? But then in the same day we'll go, I was going to say like build a new house. That's kind of an
I mean, yeah.
I'm thinking about that in particular because we have a huge residential development going in
Right.
down the road from where we
Yeah.
live, and it's like these there's this is humans impacting other humans, but it's I think a good parallel. So there's this family that we know that lives in this little house that's adjacent to this neighborhood that's been there forever, and it's like a little cottage style house, and they're surrounded by trees. It's like a
Mhm.
little forest.
Mhm.
Well, this new development that they're building, they tried to buy these people's property, and they didn't
Mhm.
want to go anywhere. They've been there forever, and they want to stay there. So they cut down all the trees that were not on those people's property, and now those people live in full sun. So they had this cute
Mm.
little like cottage in the
Yeah.
woods, and now they have a cottage in the full sun with like a completely raised,
Ugh.
Georgia clay
Oh my
colored,
gosh.
Boo.
where they're clear cut everything
Mhm.
to put in a neighborhood. Um, and I think the parallel to that is like, well, these people were just doing their thing.
Yeah.
Maybe those
Right.
weren't their trees. Maybe they didn't own those trees.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, they were powerless
Mhm.
in the face of this massive uh, development or
Mhm.
progress or whatever you,
Yeah.
you want to call it.
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I'm not sure where you hit that line where humans recognize that they are impacting and that our impact is potentially impossible to reverse in some ways. And then to also say, so we should do something about it.
Right.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people, like, they're all words and no action sometimes too.
Yeah.
Because like they're all like, oh yeah, like you said, save all these animals or save
Yeah.
this like habitat. But then when it comes to actually doing it, if it's like, I don't want to say if it's just not part or impactful on them directly, or if it's just kind of one of those things where I'm like, doesn't really bother me that much. Like it
Yeah.
just nothing happens. Because especially like that was a good example of like industrial problems and residential developments, because we've talked about in previous episodes how like these trees specifically, or just like anything like that, maybe mangroves are a better example for my thought in my head of like barriers between us and, environmental problems, especially when it comes to climate change. So it's like that project alone probably took a lot of money, first off, that came out of our pockets in some realm, but like out of those pockets of the people that were in that house, because now they're having to figure out how to live with this new area.
Yeah. Their cooling bill probably has gone up by double, right? They don't have shade anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's just so like irritating to me.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I think sometimes it's that the perceived benefit outweighs the cost.
yeah,
Right. And the benefit is immediate. We're very bad at long
that's very true.
thinking.
Yes.
It's short, very good at problem solving, very good at communication as a species, very bad at forward thinking.
Very,
Very short-sighted in most cases. And so I think there's an immediacy to it. Well, yes, I want to save the whales and save the bees, but I also want this new house. And so,
right.
and so it's easy to sort of say, oh, someone else will do that.
Yeah.
Someone else will
Yeah.
fix that
I'll be in my
problem.
new house,
Yes.
and someone else will be doing
Yes,
that.
I will install some efficient toilet flushers, and then I'll feel
Yeah.
although you should, right? That's a great thing to do, but no knocking anybody who put in efficient toilets, because that's good
Yeah,
move.
sorry if you put in efficient
My
toilets.
apologies. Good on you.
Well, with that being said, I just wanted to say thank you again for being on the
yeah.
podcast and being out here. I enjoy camping, but also like having somebody who is kind of not like the genius in their field, but has a profession and
I do some things.
you do some things.
I also have the interest.
Yes.
So, and the passion. So I think that goes a long way.
It does.
Ecology and biology is sort of a second career for me, as I was sort of talking to you guys in the beginning. And so it is new. There's a lot of things I don't know. There's a lot of things I've learned in the past, 10 or 15 years. And I have a ton more to learn. But that's the fun part about it. And that's why going camping is fun. And that's why taking a hike with an ecologist takes hours and hours. You're going to look at everything along the way. And that's great.
That's
But,
the fun part.
It is the fun. I think so too. But yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. And the camping trip is fun. And the podcast is so fun.
Everything's
I appreciate
fun.
It's great.
And I was going to say one last thing. Do you have any resources or like advice more so for upcoming biologists, ecologists, people who want to get into science? I know you said you discovered this later in life, but is there any advice for any aspiring biologists?
Yeah, I think
for us
as a professor, I talk to students all the time and do advising all the time. I think the number one thing is not to be intimidated. When you first start out, I feel like at every turn, academic advisors and maybe it's your family, it could be anybody, and they're saying that's really hard. That's going to be really hard. You're going to have to take a lot of math. You're going to have to take chemistry. You're going to have to take chemistry. But you can do it. You can set your mind to it and do it. You can do it. There are resources available. You will get through the chemistry. You will get through the math, and then you can follow your dreams, and it's totally worth it. It is a difficult road at times. They are rigorous coursework that you'll have to complete. And so I think following your passion is really important. I also like to say that you don't want to get too locked into your passion. And we've talked about this a little bit. When you're looking for opportunities to learn or to do research or to look for graduate opportunities or jobs or whatever, just because let's say I want to work on fish. But I can't find anybody that is working in a similar project to what I want to be doing that's working on fish. But I can find somebody who's working on plants. This is kind of similar to my own story.
Yeah.
Being open to working in a system outside of what your real passion or interest is in will still give you valuable skills that you
Mhm.
can translate into your field. I would say always keep your eyes open and keep your mind open,
Mhm.
because opportunities will present themselves that you will never see coming,
Mhm.
but pursuing them will open doors and teach you things within science that you had no idea was even there.
Mhm.
You know, if you walk in the door, graduate high school, walk in the door of your four-year institution and say, "I want to do biology."
Mhm.
It's like, well, let's look and see all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
possibilities. And so there's definitely something out there that you've never even come across,
Mhm.
right? And so, yeah, I think approach it with an open mind and with confidence that you can do it, that everybody's been there. Everyone's just at a different place in the same journey.
Mhm.
And find some good mentors and find some good colleagues, a good group of folks that is on the same path
Yeah.
as
Right
you are, that
here.
can support you and is going through the same things. Um, yeah, that's all. And I mean, that's really mostly academic advice, but I think
Mhm.
it's probably life advice too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surround yourself with people who are doing the same things as you and find
Yes.
support in that. Yeah, and I think just don't get discouraged.
Mhm.
I think in lots of fields, there's lots of room for growth and development in like biomedical
Mhm.
research at this point in time, and so there's room for work over there. It can
Mhm.
be a little bit more frustrating if you want to work in the environmental side or the ecological side, not just from a funding standpoint, but just because of all the issues that we've been discussing today.
Mhm.
And so in that instance, I would say just again, surround yourself with optimistic people, people who
Mhm.
are looking for solutions rather than just complaining about the problem.
Right.
Mhm.
Um, and not to forget why you got into it, you
Mhm.
know, and not to lose hope. Which I'm speaking to myself in some way,
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
ways too. You got to talk to
You
Yeah.
have
yourself
to. You have
Yeah.
to sometimes.
because I think the interest in the study comes from love, and
Mhm.
you see what you love, you know, being degraded or
Yeah.
Right.
threatened, and it can be hard to swallow, and
Mhm.
it can feel hopeless, and you can feel very small
Mhm.
as a one human being. But
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah, so I think just find yourself some good optimistic friends that you
Yeah.
can lean on and cry together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just keep going. Just never give up. Persistence,
Yes.
I think, is the
That's
key
great.
in a science career.
That's great advice. And like Ali said, thank you so much
Yeah,
for
you're
doing
welcome.
this with us.
Anytime.
It's been so wonderful and great to sit down and talk. So,
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, welcome back to Green Thread, and that, hopefully we have helped you not only tie into your climate sustainability thread, but also to now biological, to life, to everything. So,
It's all connected.
yeah, it is all connected. We'll see you next time.
bye.
Bye.